Beloveds, my friends, it's been a week. It always is in a world with war and attacks on LGBTQ people and death from COVID. Yet somehow this week, the heaviness sits a little more deeply, settles in our bodies like a cloud above our heads, like a lump in our stomach, like a pain. Just a feeling in our bodies. Maybe it's this uncertainty of a draft decision, or maybe it's the actual fear of losing bodily autonomy. I've spent this week thinking a lot about you, my beloveds, and what you need to hear in moments like these, when our Supreme Court is poised to roll back the clock 50 years on abortion rights in our country. I thought about telling you why abortion rights are so deeply needed, that they are fundamental to our bodies and our bodily autonomy. I thought about telling you that abortion is healthcare in so many cases, and that our country cares more for the unborn when they make laws like this than the many children living in poverty who could so easily be helped by government resources. I thought about telling you that there are many reasons why abortion is not the fault of the person getting the abortion. I thought about telling you that we are a developed country with the highest mortality rate for mothers, and that this lack of abortion access will only make this worse. But also, I thought about telling you that nobody needs to justify why they're getting an abortion. I thought about saying these things to convince you that the possibility of eliminating abortion access in this country will have far-reaching effects and is morally wrong. But my guess is, if you're here, if you're joining us online or in person, you don't need to be convinced. And what's more, that's probably not what you need to hear. You've probably read all of those articles and think pieces this week. So this is not a sermon about why we need abortion access, because you already know that. Instead, this is a sermon, it's a blessing for you. It's a blessing for you who are scared, for yourselves, for your loved ones, for your children and your children's children, and for people you don't even know. And I want you to know before I move on that you and your loved ones today, if you need it, can still have access to abortion here in Massachusetts. So if this is an immediate concern, please know that you can do that. And although the future may look difficult, we here are ready. And we here at Unitarian Universalists across the country and so many others will protect you and drive you where you need to go. For we've always been part of crossing borders. We've always known that laws don't make something just. So this sermon is a blessing for those of you who have had abortions, and it's a blessing for those of you who need to hear that you are a blessing, no matter what choice you may have made for your body or your life, from a minister in a church. It's a faithful exercise of our principles and covenant as Unitarian Universalists with each other. In 1963, the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, their General Assembly, passed a resolution regarding reforms of abortion statutes. They said that we as Unitarian Universalists are deeply committed to dignity and rights of human beings, and that laws which narrowly circumscribe and completely prohibit termination of pregnancy are an affront to human life and dignity. And they say that these statutes make people drive all over the country and outside of it to seek these illegal abortions. And so they said that among all of the reasons why somebody might need one, they also need to consider the fact that there are compelling reasons, physical, psychological, mental, spiritual, or economic, why somebody might need access to abortions. So I think this is really important. Our churches in 1963 were able to recognize that sometimes the reasons weren't medical necessarily, but they were psychological, mental, spiritual even, why somebody might need an abortion. And though they do outline other reasons. They eventually come to this conclusion, right? And in 1968, there was another resolution that said this: Unitarian Universalist Association urges that efforts be made to abolish existing abortion law, except to prohibit performance of an abortion by a person who is not a duly licensed physician. So if you don't know much about the history of Unitarian Universalism, we've only existed in the way that we do today since 1961. So really, it's been since the beginning of this faith that this inherent worth and dignity of every person has compelled us to be faithfully pro-choice and pro-abortion access. Since then, the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly of Congregations has made 16 statements of conscience, statements of faith, about the importance of abortion access and reproductive justice. Our most recent one in 2015 specifies the importance of intersectionality. That is how identities such as race and income impact someone's ability to access abortion and other reproductive health care. So I'm sure, given what's happening now, we might see more of these in the future. And I say all of this to remind you, to tell you that this sermon is a blessing on behalf of a faith tradition that encourages legislative action. And it's a blessing that's meant to heal ever so slowly the wounds of churches who have tried to legislate our bodies. The wounds on people who have only done or wanted what they needed to do or wanted to do and what was right for their lives. And it's a blessing on you for doing what was right for you. Our world is better for it. So our faith supports this right to legal and safe abortions for all people. So I want you to know that your anger, your questions, your rage, your stories, your sadness about abortion are safe here and welcome. We can hold their complexity. Please remember that you are loved. And this sermon is a promise. It's a promise to smash the patriarchy, the system that feels it's better to control a woman's body, to punish her for perceived transgression, than to value life, and her ability to determine that life. And this sermon is also a promise to recognize that a woman's right to choose isn't about women alone. That many, many transgender men, like me, I'm a transgender man, and non-binary people, we too have to contend with a system that would see us as women and legislate our uteruses as well. So as a side note, I had to remind myself that this issue impacted me as I wondered what I should be saying, what right I had to say something as a man. Not that it isn't important, but that I wasn't sure what I could say before reminding myself that this is an issue that could impact me. It's important for me to remember that because it can be easy to dismiss a whole group of people who this impacts, even if you're part of that group. And so this sermon is also a promise to recognize the ways in which race and class are deeply tied to these unjust laws. Going all the way back to slavery in this country. In fact, abortion was legal prior to the Civil War in this country, with it being primarily the work of midwives of all races. But as white men entered the medicalization as physicians, there was a campaign specifically against Black midwives, primarily so that gynecologists, who were mainly white men, could get money from this work. The practice of abortion was specifically used as a reason to exclude women and Black people from medical instruction. It's always been a way to control and keep out parts of our population. And this sermon is also a reminder from me, a foster and future adoptive parent, that adoption is not a solution, and that there are too many children already waiting for permanency in the foster care system, a system that also unjustly targets poor families and families of color. The blessing of my children in my life is beyond what I could imagine, but adoption is a complicated thing, something that by definition causes lifelong trauma for all involved. In an industry that monetizes babies for profit, It's not and it cannot be a just system. Those who believe that adoption is a simple option are missing a huge, huge part of this picture. This sermon is also a prayer. It's a prayer for all of those who will die because of a law that legislates bodies. This sermon is a plea for those without uteruses to care about this issue too, because it impacts you, it can be caused by you, and you are part of the struggle as well. And on this day, as we celebrate mothers and motherhood and parents of all genders, and we recognize that a day like this comes with its own set of pain for all of those with abusive or neglectful mothers, estranged mothers, no mothers, or mothers who have died. And that it's a moment of pain for those who wish to be mothers, but for whatever reason are not. Those who don't have custody of their children, those who struggle or have struggled with infertility, which I can imagine is especially difficult today when we talk about ending unwanted pregnancies. Your pain, even if unspoken, is held among the complexities of today. As we heard from Martha during our Time for All Ages, Mother's Day wasn't always about celebrating motherhood, at least not in the history of how our tradition celebrates it. Julia Ward Howe, a Unitarian, wanted to create a Mother's Day for peace. It wasn't a day to give gifts to our mothers, but rather a time for mothers to join together and proclaim that it wasn't okay for their sons and husbands to kill and be killed in wars and conflict around the world, something we're still dealing with today. In a time like this, I wonder what a Mother's Day proclamation would look like today. This week, I've seen a lot of statements, things like celebrate this Mother's Day by giving to your local abortion access fund, which is something we're going to be doing today during our offertory. Now, I'm not a mother, but I am a parent. That's my kid running around. And when I think about the world that my children are growing up into, I want to imagine a world where they get to make choices that work for their own bodies. Julia Ward Howe wrote in her initial Mother's Day proclamation, "We will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies." I thought that was pretty poignant for what we're dealing with today. What if we parents were to say that we will not have these great questions decided by irrelevant agencies for our children? That our children should not have to risk their lives and livelihood to make the choices that are right for their own bodies and healthcare. That they should not have to consider these probabilities of prison time or crossing borders or death. What if that was our Mother's Day proclamation? I noticed that the US government, the president of our government, actually did issue a proclamation this year, and it says, Roe has been the law of the land for 50 years. Basic fairness and stability of our law demands that it not be overturned. In response to the continued attack on abortion and reproductive rights across the country, my administration is exploring all the tools at our disposal to strengthen and protect women's access to critical reproductive health. We will continue to work with Congress to pass the Women's Health Protections Act, which will ensure that all women have access to critical reproductive health, no matter where they live. Now, of course, this is missing a whole swath of the population, but I do wonder, is this comfort? Because of course, we know it will take more than words from a president to make this change. It will take reform and legislative change. And in the meantime, it will take us banding together to protect and help those who need abortions, to harbor and help, to love and support each other in these moments of fear. And so, my friends, this sermon, my beloveds, is a prayer for all of us. You are loved. We are all in this together. And let us find sustenance for this work and compassion for our siblings across the country and the world who find themselves in situations where decisions made by irrelevant agencies are made in the service of power and control and not human lives. So we must resist and support and love each other. This is not the end. Our prayer will push us to action, for we are a blessing through our words and deeds for this world that we hope to create. May it be so. And let us say together, Amen. Amen.